Assalamu alaikum, brothers, sisters and friends. Welcome to a new episode of the GDM show, the Global Dawah Movement show. We have another very exciting show planned for you guys today. But before we get into it, here with brother, I was going to say Salahuddin, brother Sabur. Assalamu alaikum.
I've evolved into...
No, it's because I did the show with Salahuddin. The last show was with brother Salahuddin. So
Yeah.
I was just remembering him. Anyway, how are you today?
I'm good, excited.
Excellent. Okay, so you and me have done a few shows recently on the topic of evolution.
Yeah.
We've addressed evolution from a few different angles. We I believe on the last show we touched upon it from the angle of the infighting or the disagreement amongst the experts in the field of evolutionary sciences and so on and so forth. In this week's show, we're approaching it from another very interesting perspective, and that's a perspective that people don't really think about, I think, too much, but it's from the social perspective, right? So what you want to share with us today, I guess, is from a social perspective, how do certain social realities, sociological realities, break down the Darwinian theory of evolution?
Fantastic.
Right?
I think
So
that's a good introduction. What I'd like to do before getting into it is pretty much all the science that you know right now is based upon testimony. It's the testimony of people in physics, chemists, biologists, anthropologists, whatever. What I want to do today is give you some science which you can actually test out for yourself.
Excellent.
So it's like natural experiments.
So finally some sort of testable evidence for evolution, I guess.
Against evolution.
Yeah.
Against Darwinian mechanism of
okay,
evolution.
yeah.
Just to be
I was
precise.
joking anyway.
Right.
You took
But
me too
no,
seriously.
but this is actually falsifiable, testable evidence that you can actually show why the Darwinian mechanism of evolution is just
Doesn't make sense. Okay.
right? So what I'd like to first get into is, look, we're always told that everything is about survivability in Darwinism, right? It's survival of the fittest. It's a flight for life. It's a all against all brawl. Now, we're giving examples in terms of pines, sponges, birds, humans, dolphins, primates, whatever, right?
Living things, all living things.
All of life is in a continuous all against all, survival.
Struggle
right?
to survive. It's a very common sort of...
Yeah.
Even the layman understands this concept of evolution.
And you have to understand, this is the core of Darwinism. Now, David Stove, who we actually mentioned in the last show, I believe, he's a philosopher. He's passed away a few years ago. In his book Darwinian Fairy Tales, he deals with this assumption in the very first chapter, right? So he basically says human life doesn't represent what Darwinism says it basically should represent, because if we are, say there is, Darwinism is true, and all of us, including our bodies and our social interactions, are products of Darwinian evolution, then we should act in the way that it assumes that we do, but we don't. So you don't have this all against all system in human beings. So David gives the example of a man who, he's surviving. He thinks he needs to survive against his wife, his children, the postman, the mayor, the police, the doctors, and he believes that every single one of them is in exactly the same position. And he says, imagine what a paranoid state that person would actually be in. And he says, look, this should be classified as paranoia darwiniensis. But we don't actually find this. And he says, if we were to cure such a person, we'd actually start off by actually saying the Darwinian theory of evolution is wrong. Because if you try and explain to him, no, you don't need to worry, he'll think to himself, actually, no, this guy's trying to manipulate me. Because, and this again, like Richard Dawkins mentions, every communication is manipulation of the signal receiver by the signal sender, meaning you're always looking for your own benefit to survive against everyone else in every facet of human behavior, including communication. Now, this just goes totally against our experience as human beings. When I'm talking to you, I'm sometimes talking to you to try and convince you of a certain argument. I'm not looking to survive. or I might be talking to you about a documentary that I actually saw, and it's purely out of interest. I'm talking to you about, I don't know, something in quantum mechanics or something in relativity or whatever, right? It's got nothing to do with me trying to manipulate you to help my own survival. And this whole all against all core assumption of Darwinism goes totally against human experience.
Okay, that's very clear. You put it very, very clearly. So that's very interesting. That's point number one. What's the second point from a social perspective that you want to discuss with us?
Now, Darwinism basically says that populations, organisms, they always eat up to the maximum of the food supply, then beyond it.
Okay.
And that's, they have loads of children, and all organisms are trying to have as many children as possible. Now, firstly, that's just wrong.
Yeah.
When, obviously, with bacteria, pines, certain types of sponges, certain types of fish, they are trying to reproduce as much as possible, right? Do you find that in human beings? That a human being is trying to have as many children as possible?
Well, we don't, at least not in many places in the world.
For Darwinism to be true, this needs to be true universally.
Yes.
All times, all places. So you can't be like, oh yeah, but there are some people in, there's a guy in Argentina and he has like 2 wives or 3 wives and he has like 50 children, right? Well, there's some big problems there, because the very fact that we're pointing him out shows that he's odd, right? Because most human beings don't try and have that many children. Secondly, why have the institution of marriage? And where did that evolve from? If we are trying to reproduce as much as possible, because if that's really the case, then we shouldn't really have a restrictive institution such as marriage.
And another way of looking at it is such a highly evolved mind, as they would have you believe that the mind evolved, our rational faculties evolved, we would use them to find ways of reproducing as much as we can. And it'd be easier for human beings compared to any other life form, based on the fact that we have such well-developed cognitive faculties. As a side point, I was just thinking that's very interesting.
So you don't have that. And the next step within the Darwinian mechanism is when organisms eat beyond their food supply, then you have deaths in the offspring, and massive number of deaths in the offspring, and during that process you basically get natural selection in species. The main driver is that we always eat up to the maximum of our food supply, then beyond it, then you get natural selection taking place. Okay, again, this is from the origin of species. It doesn't happen. There's sociological evidence, testable. You can go out and find out for yourself whether every single human being that you know, including yourself, is trying to reproduce as much as possible. And every piece of food is essentially a potential person in the future. No one really acts like that.
That's number 2. Okay, so number 3.
The third assumption is the link between privilege and population, essentially. That the more privileged you are, the more children you're going to have. And what we actually find is we find an inverse relationship between how privileged you are and how many children you have. So this is kind of linked to the second assumption. What's really interesting is humans that have the most privilege, they're the most educated, they have the most wealth, they sometimes, well, more of the time than less, have fewer children than less educated, poorer children. Say someone in Asia, right, Southeast Asia, on average they might have 7 children, 5 children, a high amount. You go to Western Europe, very affluent, maybe 2 children
generally
per
across the
household.
board. I mean, you can talk for yourself from Pakistan, right? We're both from Pakistan. If you go to Pakistan, you see people generally have more children. You come back to the UK and the opposite is true. True.
So it's an inverse relationship. And the second assumption, which I spoke about, not only is that not true, the third assumption, which is linked to it, is the complete opposite to what a Darwinism would actually predict.
The story is getting deeper, basically. It's getting worse for the theory itself from a social perspective.
There's enough evidence from these first 3 assumptions. But I think the fourth is something which is so obvious that you don't actually need to go out and even test it, but if you want to, you can.
Okay.
And the fourth is that deep down, we are all selfish. It's all about me, me, me. Now, what sociobiologists, these are people who believe that all human behavior can be explained, essentially evolved from a Darwinian mechanism. They would say it's, not only can we explain it, every single thing, including communication, is purely for survivability. Now, what we find amongst human beings is the very opposite. We have civilization, we have self-restraint, we have morality, we have ethics, we have charities. Why do we have these systems which go totally against the selfish gene, right? The theory that,
we're all inherently selfish.
We're all inherently selfish. Now, obviously, the first person, as soon as you reflect about this, there's a direct contradiction between what Darwinism says and societal realities, essentially. Now, what's really interesting is sociobiologists realize this. So what they've done is they've come up with an ad hoc rationalization, which is the veneer theory. Now, for those of us not in the construction industry, veneer is basically this very sort of smooth surface, this, it can be wood sometimes, that you put over a coarse background, right? So say, you strip down these, right now it's quite smooth, you strip it down, what do you have? You have concrete, you have something harsh. So what they're basically saying is we have this veneer, we have this smoothness about us, but deep down inside, when you get rid of this, it's all about me, it's all about selfishness.
Okay.
But human beings aren't like that. Sometimes human beings in dire situations, they give up their lives for the sake of others.
Obviously in those situations the veneer seems to fade away if there is such a thing.
If there is such a thing, then beneath the veneer there shouldn't be some coarse reality of selfishness. What we often find is that there's a even smoother reality of empathy, of selflessness, of people who are willing to give up everything for the benefit of others. So the very fact that we have altruism, that we give up things for the sake of others, this is a dagger in the heart of Darwinian mechanism. It's just a big spanner in the works. I mean, how else do you explain it? Why are we, according to David Stove, I mean, he puts it eloquently, we're hopelessly addicted to altruism.
And just to make the point more balanced, humans are selfish as well, right? We know this, but what we're saying is that selfish nature should be predominant. And if not only predominant, it should be all consuming.
Yes, exactly. It shouldn't just be predominant. It should be the status quo.
But what we see, it's not only not predominant, it's far from being a status quo, right?
And for Darwinism to be true, it needs to be universal. Now, one of the ways that David says that the Darwinists try and get out of it is, they try and say, well, sometime in the past it was like this. But for Darwinism to be true, it actually needs to be universal. Right? And we don't find that. Now look, survival of the fittest. Why do we have institutions like hospitals? That's the survival of the unfittest. Why do we say somebody has a child that's born, they have Down syndrome, they're disabled, we still take care of them? In fact, it's a duty to take care of them. But according to Darwinism, no, you don't.
I mean,
you don't need to take care
the proponents of Darwinism themselves in such situations would do the opposite of what the theories they hold to.
Which we can talk about social Darwinism in another show. But what's really important here, our civilization, our morality, our ethical code, all of these things which restrain us, self-restraint, is totally against core Darwinism. Why do we have religion? Why do we have people that spend so much resources and so much time on activities which are detrimental to their survivability? A monk in some cave in Tibet, he's not aiding his survivability and his
By remaining
reproductive chances by staying in a cave all his life. But humans do that.
Yeah.
Now, they always come up with ad hoc rationalizations, and they say that must be a malfunction, this must be this must be this. But
That's across the board.
you need to call a spade a spade.
We're not looking at isolated in cases. We see people in their numbers, right, who are spiritually inclined, or at some point in their lives become spiritually inclined, focusing on the point you're making about monks or any religious, most religious practices. We see this in Christian monks and many other monks, or just generally people spiritualists, right? They will isolate themselves, remain celibate, and they not only this, they do this, but they find peace in doing this. They find this content, this happiness, this joy, which they would not find in being selfish and living their lives.
I mean, look, human history itself is just one large piece of data which is so heavy upon Darwinism that any real person who, what I mean by real is that they want to confront the evidence, what they need to do is they need to explain why we are altruistic, why we have civilization, why we have these things. And this is the fifth assumption, right?
Yeah, and we need to quickly touch upon this because we are running out of time.
No, that's absolutely fine.
Very interesting show. I'm sure the brothers and sisters want to watch more of this. We will be doing future shows just to emphasize that point.
Yeah.
But yes, let's go on to the fifth point.
The fifth assumption, and this is again linked to the fourth assumption, all these assumptions are linked but they're still distinct, is the theory of, how they try and explain away altruism is they say it's because of shared genes, right? So what they say is, I believe it's one of these JBS Haldane or one of these biologists, he said, I'll give up my life for 2 half brothers, 8 cousins or something like this. So it's not about you, but you're just a vehicle for the gene. You got this gene who
it's like a little alien sitting there with
why I have these inverted commas, and this is something which David speaks about, is that we give the gene a personality. But what he's basically saying is, sorry to be crude, but he says prime numbers aren't sex mad, right? You can't say a prime number is like really randy. You can't in the same way say gene is something which is selfish and it's always looking out for itself. I mean, you could say, it's a metaphor. You can say that, but the way that you actually are describing the way it acts, it almost sounds,
I just decided in my mind, little Sabur gene with a little beard sitting there and saying, right, Sabur, go and do this, do that. But it doesn't work like that.
There might be one. There might be one.
Okay, anyway, yeah.
So they say it's all about shared genes, right? But this doesn't make sense because this ad hoc rationalization to explain away sympathy, empathy, altruism, morality, civilization. Why would I give money to a poor person in Africa who I have no shared genes with? Now they try and come up with another beyond shared genes. They try and come up with another ad hoc rationalization. It's reciprocal altruism. So you scratch his back, one day he's going to scratch my back. Well, what I would advise people that think this way is to consider the example of most people who give charity, that they're not looking for the person to come up to them and say, thank you so much. Some people even give charity anonymously online. You'll never be able to find out that person that gave you charity. Now they'll come up with, you know what it is? We all human beings, we have a collective destiny and we need to survive together. Okay, that's fantastic. And you know what? I agree with you. But that again goes against core Darwinism. You can't have all against all and then say, actually, to survive, we all need to work together. So sometimes you just need to be consistent. And the way to be consistent is realize Darwinism and its assumptions, and we just went over 5, go directly in collision with human experience. Now, if you believe that, and like some social biologists basically say, we're deluded. We are actually deep down selfish, subconsciously, but we don't know it. Now, if you want to subscribe to that, fantastic. It's a free world. You want to subscribe to that, no problem. But don't expect the rest of us to believe you.
Yeah, it's almost like a non-existent reality. They're claiming, we're selfish, but we never see it acted out in life. So are we really selfish then? Well, we can't be. If it's just hidden and it's there, that's just a claim then. If we're not seeing it like manifesting itself in any way. I think you made some very powerful points today. A lot of food for thought for the brothers and sisters watching.
Can I just stop you there for a second?
Yeah.
Now, what I do want to say this, and I want to be clear. I mean, there's a lot of videos online where people say, "Oh, you plagiarized this guy, and you did this, you did that." Let me just tell you, everything that I've just said in this show, none of this is my content.
Yes.
This is based upon hardworking philosophers, academics, and a lot of it I actually got from Darwinian fairy tales, which I really recommend anybody who's interested in this topic to read up upon.
Excellent. So it's not from him. He's just done the research and looked into it, and he's just sharing the points that he's come across. So hopefully this has been beneficial, brothers and sisters, friends. And we, like I said, we have a lot more shows planned on this subject, on the subject of evolution, Darwinian evolution, and so on and so forth. So stay tuned for upcoming GDM shows. Make sure to like the show, make sure to subscribe. And until next time, Assalamu alaikum.